I'm speaking right now with Dr. Jake Weiss of Coachability Consultants, and super excited to learn more about Coachability Consultants and what coachability actually is. So, Jake, if you can maybe explain a little bit about your background and give us a big picture view of Coachability Consultants, and then we can kind of dive into all the nooks and crannies and bits and pieces that your company is bringing to not only corporations but sports as well.
Awesome. Definitely. Well, thank you for having me, Carrie. Excited to talk to you about coachability in our company as well. So to give you some background on myself, I grew up down in South Florida playing soccer and attended the University of Central Florida to play soccer there. So I grew up in the sports world in that space. And from there, found interest in psychology. So that was my undergraduate studies, and decided after that I wanted to explore the realm of industrial organizational psychology a bit further. So I went to graduate school at DePaul University in Chicago, which is where I earned my Ph.D. in industrial organizational or IO psychology, with a specialization in employee coachability and organizational coaching. During my time there, I did research on the concepts of leadership and of coaching in organizations. And prior to that, I worked on some NASA-funded grants that were focused on composing the optimal crew that would go on the mission to Mars in the 2030s. So was excited to do a lot of that work and build up my research capabilities. And after that, I worked in the management consulting sector in that arena, focused on driving sales force effectiveness in the health sciences and biopharma space. And that's what kind of transitioned me into Coachability Consultants. So I did my dissertation on the concept of coachability. And while I was with Intaflex, the company, the management consulting company that I worked for, we started building workshops around developing coachability. And that really got me interested in the application of it. And then not too long ago, back in 2020, in May of 2020, launched Coachability Consultants. And really our main focus there is expanding the breadth and the impact of coachability across different industries by partnering with companies to create and really sustain these strong coaching and coachability cultures that we know will drive their near-term and their long-term success.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. It sounds like you've had a very broad and interesting path that's led you to founding your company, Coachability Consultants. So the average person might have an idea of what the definition of coachability is, but can you actually put some meat behind that? What is coachability? How is it defined? And what does it look like in practice?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Since we all come from different contexts and different arenas, we might have a different understanding of what coachability really is or how it plays out. So we've done a lot of extensive research to really uncover what those true behaviors are, what it means to be coachable. And what our research indicates is that coachability or highly coachable individuals are those that proactively seek information. They're highly receptive when that information or feedback is provided to them. And then they take action to implement that feedback in order to drive their growth and development. So it's really about taking initiative and finding feedback or information when it's not readily available or not provided to you, rather than waiting around and saying, I'm not improving because my coach, my manager, my supervisor is not giving me that information. When the feedback is provided, highly coachable individuals, whether it's positive or whether it's constructive, and regardless of who's giving them the feedback, they really internalize it and listen to it. Because if they don't, that eliminates any possibility they can use that feedback. So even if it's someone who they may not have the best relationship with or someone that they don't know as well, they don't get defensive or devalue the feedback just based on that. And then one of the big driving factors is taking that feedback and really using it, putting it into practice. A lot of times people will ask for feedback. They'll seem like they're listening to it. They'll nod their heads. They'll write it down. But then nothing changes after that conversation. Nothing's implemented. No behavior changes. Nothing's improved. So the essence of coachability is really finding that information by seeking it, being receptive to it, and ultimately taking that information and putting it into practice. So that's what our research has uncovered. And those are the skill behaviors that we find highly coachable individuals really exhibiting and enacting both on the corporate side and in the sports arena.
Yeah. So within that, you mentioned, I heard the word skill. So is coachability something that's inherent, or can it be trained? And what does that look like for someone that wants to get better at asking for feedback?
Yeah, definitely. So what we found through our research, and this is a question that people frequently ask us, is coachability a trait or is it a skill? Is it something that I just need to identify in the recruiting process or select for in the hiring process, or can I really develop that? And through our research and through our application, what we find is that it's both. It's both a trait and a skill. That some of us, based on our disposition, based on our inherent nature, are just more geared toward being coachable, where we like feedback more. We have a better relationship with it. It doesn't necessarily affect us in a negative way as much as it does for others. So it's definitely, there is a trait component to it that we can identify in the hiring process or in the recruiting process, but because it manifests into the behaviors that we just talked about, into seeking feedback, demonstrating a receptiveness to this feedback and information, and then taking that and leveraging it, implementing it to grow and improve, it manifests into certain behaviors that we can really train and elevate to a highly coachable level through skills training. And a lot of time, what that looks like is bringing an awareness to some of the mindsets or motivations that we may have blind spots around that impact our willingness to engage in these behaviors. So, to give a clearer example of that, a lot of times people will say that they seek feedback pretty frequently and they're asking for it. They're asking for it in a quality way. But sometimes what it looks like is we might just say to our coach or to our manager, hey, how can I get better? What can I do to get on the field? What can I do to make the President's Club in my organization? So we're asking for feedback, but we're not really asking in a way that gives the feedback provider any context or really any specificity with which they can then provide us good feedback, because we're giving them just a broad scope of how can I get better.
Right.
So a lot of the training focuses on, one, what is your motivation when you go into asking for feedback? Are you really asking to get better, or are you asking to give off a certain image or to boost your ego? So what's the main reason you're going into it? And if we understand why we're going into these conversations, these feedback conversations, we then know our motivation for asking, and we can ask in a more effective way that allows us to receive the quality information we really need to grow and improve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good to explain there. So you mentioned it being both a trait and a skill. Is there any type of assessment to kind of give a baseline for people of where they're at within their coachability? And if so, like what does that, are there different segments of that assessment? What does that look like?
Yes, so there is an assessment, and because coachability research is relatively recent and is just emerging, there hasn't been an assessment tool that's validated that individuals can use to really uncover their level of coachability in a scientifically valid way. So what we did is we actually developed our own internal coachability at work assessment, which we use on both the corporate and the sports side. And what that assessment does, to your point, is it really helps individuals uncover and understand where they fall on the coachability spectrum. There's an interesting stat that about 70% of individuals think they're more coachable than their coaches or managers think they are. So there's definitely a disparity and a gap between how coachable we think we are and how coachable others perceive us to be. And
Mm-hmm.
bringing light to this allows us to improve our coachability. If we understand where we are, we know the areas that we can then start to elevate to improve our coachability and build it to a higher level. So what our assessment tool does is it outlines and really uncovers individuals' baseline level of coachability. So it tells you what your overall coachability is, and it breaks down your coachability on 10 scientifically validated factors that we know from the science really strongly influence and drive and impact our ability to be coachable. So, what some of these factors are, for example, are humility. Are we
Mm-hmm.
willing to hear constructive information from a variety of different sources? Um, do we ascribe value to other people's opinions? And that humility is important to understand because that impacts, one, whether we're going to seek out feedback, if we're not extremely humble, if we don't demonstrate that humility and view others as quality sources of information, we're much less likely to seek out those sources of feedback. If we are lower in humility, we're probably less likely to receive feedback from other people,
Mm-hmm.
and be open to those different viewpoints. So our assessment really uncovers the overall coachability, and then on 10 different factors: humility, initiative, agility, perseverance, authenticity in relation to feedback. Different factors like that are what we bring to the forefront. And then having an understanding of those then allows individuals to improve their behaviors around coachability in a much more efficient and effective way.
Mm-hmm. You had mentioned, I just noted that there hasn't been a lot of research on coachability. Why, to me, it seems like there should be a ton of research out there just with, how our society is now and things like that. Like, why do you think that hasn't been the case? And kind of what actually inspired you to pick coachability, for your dissertation?
Yeah, yeah. So you, like you said, you would definitely think that there's a lot more research done on the concept of coachability, because coming from a sports background, that's what you hear from the time that you start playing sports, is the importance of being coachable.
Mm-hmm.
One, for you individually, so that you can improve, get better, and realize your potential, but also the benefit for the coach and for the team, that you can integrate well and collaborate with your peers, with your teammates, and with your coaches. So it's a really important concept that hasn't received much research. And I think a big part of that is because a lot of our attention focused primarily on the coach and understanding
Mm-hmm.
really what makes a quality coach. What does that look like? What are those behaviors that the coaches enact when they are high quality coaches? What type of environments do they create? So we gave a lot of attention to the coaches, which is very important, because coaches are critical both in organizations and obviously on the sports side. But what we were seeing is that because there was so much attention given to the coaches, we almost neglected the other side of the equation of who's receiving the coaching. What are their characteristics that lend themselves to being high quality coachees and someone who can really engage and wants to be coached? So there's, I think, because of the widespread attention on the coach, that's why we were seeing a lack of research done on the side of the coachee. And that's a very similar kind of analogy or scenario that we saw playing out earlier in the research in the IO field, where we started focusing a lot on leaders and trying to
Mm-hmm.
understand how to create and how to identify quality leaders. But because these are all dyadic dynamics or dyadic relationships between two different parties, it's important to consider both sides and not study one in a vacuum, but really
Mm-hmm.
understand how can we maximize the dynamic and the relationship between these two parties. And that requires us understanding both sides in combination. So that kind of awareness and realizing that gap in the literature is ultimately what prompted my dissertation in this area.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we had been building as part of my old organization at Intaflex, we were building business coaching workshops on the corporate side. And what we noticed was that I think the International Coaching Federation came out with a report back in 2016 and 2018 that spoke to this. But organizations across the world are spending over $3 billion annually
Wow.
on coaching. So yeah, it's a huge number. So both on training their managers on how to coach effectively, how to provide quality feedback, create these good environments, but also creating formalized coaching approaches for the company so that everyone across the organization is coaching in the same ways and really speaking the same language. So there's heavy investments on that side, but as you could expect, there was nothing on the other side of that equation on
Mm-hmm.
the coachee. So that really prompted our interest and my interest and passion in this area about really understanding what coachability was so that we can maximize the coaching dynamics both on the sports side and on the corporate side. And through doing the work on my dissertation, I initially was interested in it from a research perspective, and from a practical applications perspective, but I didn't always see the connection and the relation between myself and what I was doing until I got a bit deeper into it
Mm-hmm.
and started to draw a lot of connections to how I was as an athlete in college. So I went to the University of Central Florida. I played there, and as you're aware, when they bring people in, you get talked up. You're expected to
Mm-hmm.
be hey, you're coming into a top 10 program, you're going to be our starting left back or our left midfielder. And then you get there and realize that there are 5 other people that you're competing with. And I vividly remember my freshman year at one point, I wasn't playing much. And I'm saying to myself, why am I not playing? Like, why is my coach not playing me? And what am I doing wrong here?
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like my coach is developing me the way that I should be improving. And that was my mindset then. And then going through this research and understanding coachability more, it really made me realize that, hey, it's my responsibility to be going out there and practicing more, to be finding the feedback I need to start elevating my skills to get on the field. So through my work on coachability, I was able to see that I may not have been as coachable as I needed to be back in the day. And then
Mm-hmm.
I was able to start kind of making those connections and realizing the impact that it did have for me throughout my college career as I realized this more, became more coachable, and really wanted to spread the impact of this both across the sports arena and the corporate side of things. Because one, from a practical and an anecdotal sense, I know the impact that it can have, but also from a research perspective, we have empirical quantitative data that really speaks to the broader importance and impact of this for both sports and for organizations.
Yeah. So it's, in this, I'm hearing, like, what I'm hearing is your coachability is your coachability. It's not like the percentage isn't higher on an external factor. It's, more internal. And within your research, is there, like, did you find a certain percentage of how much coachability is actually underneath our own personal control?
Yeah, so we that's exactly what we find essentially, that the bulk of coachability rests on the individual, that
Mm-hmm.
we all have ownership and empowerment to drive our development, and we can do that through our coachability. And what some of our research alludes to and what it looks at and finds is that, like you said, the surrounding environment of an organization, of a team, definitely has an impact on our coachability, but it's not nearly as significant as our own willingness to exhibit these behaviors. So we're finding that almost less than 15 to 10% of an individual's coachability is dependent on their environment or on who their coach is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the idea that we really want to spread and expose and get into um, more organizations, into more sports teams, that regardless of who your coach is, you can still develop, you can still improve and realize your potential. A lot of times people will say, well, what if I don't have a great relationship with my coach? And that's a common situation where there may not be the best dynamic there. But think about all the different and novel sources of information you can find that allow you to get quality feedback you can ultimately use to improve. So on the sports side, you may not have the best relationship with your head coach, but there's a coaching staff, there's different individuals there you can ask for feedback. You
Mm-hmm.
have teammates who you can ask. There's video and data and film that you can go watch and really get more objective feedback from that. So to say that we can't develop because of the environment or the people around us is not necessarily the way that we view it. We do think that that is a key factor, that we want to create a strong culture that fosters coachability,
Mm-hmm.
but the onus and the bulk of coachability really rests on the individual, to be empowered to go out there, be coachable, and drive their growth and development.
Right. So let's kind of spin it into now, you've explained the research, you've explained the definition of coachability. Let's talk about how your company, Coachability Consultants, can help impact corporations and sports teams. So what types of trainings do you provide, or what does the company kind of look like, and what can they help teams and companies with?
Right. So we like to take a comprehensive, pretty holistic view in terms of what we do. So a lot of times we don't go into a team or an organization and just run a one-off training session, because we want to make sure that this theme, that this concept of coachability really becomes ingrained in the fabric of the team and of the culture there, because that's what allows for that long-term continued success. So a lot of what we do, it does involve training, but it focuses a bit more, a more broader lens than just training itself. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll go into a team or an organization, and the first step is really to understand their current culture.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you right now? What does it look like on a daily basis? So that might entail some interviews with leaders or with coaches and with some of the players or employees to understand and get their feel on what's going on. We're an evidence-based, metric-driven organization, so we also do a lot of quantitative measurement to uncover what the culture looks like. So not only are we getting subjective, qualitative kind of impressions and their thoughts that provides us with rich data, but we're also able to kind of look at that in combination with some quantitative data about the culture to understand where it is and what areas can be improved. And from there, we work with the athletes or with the employees and typically roll out the assessment with them first so that they can really understand and uncover their current coachability, because many times people don't really have a good read on that. So we want to make sure that we have an awareness around that before we start improving it. Self-awareness is the first step to then elevating your skills around coachability. So a lot of times we'll roll out the assessment. People will take that, they get an individualized report immediately after taking that breaks down their coachability. They can read through that report, get some actionable tips, and then we hold debrief sessions off of that. So it's one thing to understand your coachability or read your report, but it's another thing to really have a good sense about how that operates for you on a day-to-day basis. So we hold debrief sessions where we guide people through really deep, thoughtful questions to get them thinking about not only these are my scores, but this is how my scores translate into action for me. This is how my coachability shows up for me on the field, in practice, or at work in organizations. And from there, we then start developing the skills through our training workshops. So we've developed a few really impactful training workshops that we customize for anyone that we're working with to make sure it really resonates and has impact in their specific context. And that focuses on elevating their skill set around how to seek feedback in a proactive way and do it in a highly effective way that ensures you get quality information in return. So rather than how can I get better or what can I do to get better, it's really asking in a targeted, specific way that elicits that quality information that you can use.
Right.
And another skill that we really focus on is we know that as humans, it's difficult for us to receive constructive information or critical information about ourselves. So, how do we understand our own resistance to this information? So, really bringing light to why we may discount feedback. So, we bring an awareness to that. And then we want to elevate individuals' receptivity to that information. So, can we really lower our defensiveness, not discount that feedback, and take some of those filters off to more effectively hear and internalize this constructive feedback that will benefit us? And then ultimately, one of the last skills that we train is, now that I have this feedback, we know that people receive tons and tons of feedback and we can't implement every piece of it. But how do we sift through this information that we're receiving and discern the usefulness of it to know which pieces really will drive the greatest impact for us? And then how do we go about implementing that? Can we put together an action plan? Do we need to knock down some barriers that might get in our way? And can we map that out? So that's really what we train, so that people can much more efficiently and effectively move on that feedback once they've sought it out and once they've received it. So those are the major skills that we train. And then just to add to that, to really build the culture, we also help organizations and partner with them to implement processes and systems. So on the corporate side, we'll work with them, and we've developed a collaborative coaching approach that defines a role for both the coach and the coachee. Most coaching approaches just focus on what does the coach need to be doing. So ours is innovative and takes that a step further and incorporates coachability by empowering the coachee to be an integral part of that coaching dynamic and really drive their growth. So to build the culture, we have processes and systems like that that we implement. On the sports side, it might look more like an individual development plan where individual athletes are responsible for their development and collaborating with their coaches on those plans to prioritize their development, but really giving them responsibility for driving that growth. And that builds a culture of expectations around how we operate here, how coachable we are, and that we're an organization or a team that really values continuous learning and improvement. So those are the major kind of buckets that we work in and that Coachability Consultants focuses on.
Yeah. So you mentioned, the corporate world and the sports world. Is there an ideal client within each of those? Is there a size of organization or an age group maybe on the sports side? Like who can benefit, and maybe can you speak to like how some of your clients have responded after they've gone through the process with you?
Definitely. So we have more of a broad brush stroke about the type of clients that we work with. Any client who's really on the sports or the organizational side who understands the importance of continuous learning, development, for not only their culture but for driving success. Those are the type of organizations and sports teams that we really want to target. Those who embrace feedback, who understand the importance of feedback cultures and two-way dialogue and peer-to-peer feedback and things of that nature. So those are where we derive our greatest energy and passion about doing this work. So we work with organizations of all sizes. We've worked with teams as small as 10 up to organizations that have over 1,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
So um, we don't really nitpick about the size of the organization we work with. It's really about if they hold similar values to what we hold around development, learning, empowering their athletes, empowering their employees to own and drive their own development. That's really the type of organizations that we're looking for. So we have rolled these initiatives out both on the sports side and on the corporate side with these different groups. On the sports side, we typically focus on athletes that are probably 17 to a bit older than that.
Mm-hmm.
We focus on elite college programs as one of our main sweet spots, as well as on the professional side of things, both with their athletes and with their front offices. So it trends in the direction of um, a little bit older than youth for the
Mm-hmm.
sports side. On the corporate side, we really work with any age range, but we find that a lot of our work actually falls with pretty experienced and tenured groups, whether that's a sales force or a different group. We're finding that our work really drives impact even at the level where people are really tenured, because a lot of times people become more comfortable with the way that they're doing things, and coachability gives them an avenue to be innovative and to take in new strategies, new ways of working that might be even more efficient and effective in today's landscape that requires us to pivot and be agile almost on a daily basis. So
Mm-hmm.
our work does kind of transcend context and age group, but those are kind of the sweet spots that we focus on. And in terms of the response that we've received after rolling these out, um, I can give you some of the anecdotal evidence that we've seen just in terms of we rolled out one of our training sessions at a national sales meeting. Of course, this was before the pandemic when we were live. We
Mm-hmm.
rolled it out to a group of over 100 people. And it was they had a 5-day national sales meeting, and it was the second highest rated session
Oh, wow.
at their
That's great.
whole national sales meeting and their convention. Yeah, so it was great feedback to receive that. But in terms of results, we have quantitative data to speak to that, because as I mentioned, everything we do is not only evidence-based, but data-driven. So anytime we roll out a training program, we
Mm-hmm.
make sure that we're measuring the impact. And what that involves is pre and post measurements to look at behaviors and results and what that trajectory of change looks like. So some of the stats that we've seen so far in terms of the quantitative results impact around behaviors that we rolled out some of this training, even virtually, and found great impact. So, for example, 78% of employees of over a 100-person sales force, we found that 78% of them post training were seeking more constructive feedback proactively. Um,
That's great.
88% of
That's
them were
really
much more
great.
receptive. Yeah, yeah, it was a huge number, and we were very excited to see the rate of change there, given that it was a large group as well.
Yeah.
Um, and then when it comes to receiving the information, which is arguably somewhat more difficult than seeking it out, is being receptive to constructive information that you may not necessarily want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what we found is that pre and post training, 88% of individuals were more receptive to this constructive feedback. So an even larger number than that 78%, but great to see that the training has an impact on their willingness to not only seek this feedback, but to really internalize it and hear it,
Yeah.
which ultimately will drive the results. So those are some of the behaviors that we've seen elevated. And then in terms of just pure results, we've seen that roughly 78% of individuals after our trainings were indicated as more agile and adaptable by their leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So they were better able to pivot during times of change and not react so much to change, but to get on the front end of that.
Yeah.
So that's another area that we're very excited to see. And then, of course, we found that 100% of these coaching interactions or developmental discussions, as indicated by the leaders, were much more effective. Meaning, not only were they more engaged and satisfied with the way that those interactions unfolded, but ultimately with the results of that interaction, they were much more satisfied with the impact that it had on driving development, on improving performance.
Yeah. Those are very, very good numbers considering the fact that you said a lot of it has been with very seasoned corporate people who a lot of times don't like change. And so to see that,
Right.
to hear those numbers, like you're teaching old, to coin a phrase, you're teaching old dogs new tricks, which can only make, the companies more higher performing and better relationships and better retention and things like of that sort.
Right.
So if a company or a team wanted to get in touch with you, how would they go about, finding out where you're at and what events you might have coming up with Coachability Consultants?
Yeah, so the best way to reach out and find our information would be to visit our website. It's coachabilityconsultants.com. That's a great way to find us, to learn a little bit more about the leadership team that's in place right now, read some of the content that we're producing. So on there, we have not only research publications that really show the nitty gritty science behind what we're doing, but also more applicable content on coachability that we've written that speaks more to what we do around coachability or the benefit for organizations. So translating that research into really digestible science that people can read and understand. So that's a great place to find us, our information, more about what we do. And also, if anyone's interested in learning more, they can always reach out to us via email. My email is jake.weiss@coachabilityconsultants.com. And we have people that reach out to us that way as well to set up a 30, 45, 60-minute Zoom call just to hear a bit more about what we do, the research behind it, and how we may potentially be able to partner with them to bring these concepts into their teams.
Yeah. So, Jake, this has been great. Is there anything else that you want to speak to? Anything that maybe we forgot to mention that you want to touch on here at the closing?
I think the only thing that I would mention, just outside of what we've talked about, is the importance of what we're seeing, not only just coachability itself, but creating strong cultures around this. And this is kind of a paradigm shift that we see happening across both sports and organizations, where they're being really intentional now about really creating a strong culture that allows them to not only develop more effectively and more efficiently, but really develop quality individuals who can pivot across different situations and drive success in various different contexts. Today, one of the most important factors is being agile, being nimble, being able to pivot. And these cultures that we see a lot of organizations trending toward implement more of, it's enabling that adaptability, that agility that's necessary for success in these volatile, complex, rapid, and change-ridden environments. So outside of just coachability for developing skills, we've seen great impact and great importance about creating cultures around this. So that's the only element I would add, is that to really sustain the success of a team or of a corporation and of an organization, it's critical to be intentional about the culture you're creating and make sure that you're infusing it with themes like coachability, like coaching, like feedback and continuous improvement.
Yeah. Well, Jake, thank you so much for your time. This has been great. And there's, it's amazing to understand that this is actually a new kind of, way to go. And I know you're doing great work, and wish you the best of luck with diving in and helping people become more coachable.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me. It's been awesome talking with you and excited to spread the word of coachability.